So, Blaine, start us off the focus today on Rudy Giuliani. He's going to try to speak directly with prosecutors ahead of his booking. Is that correct?
Well, we know at least his legal team will, Andrea, and that's what we're all standing by and waiting for. We're expecting his attorneys to really show up here at the courthouse any minute and go into a meeting with the DA's team. But what we've already seen today, Andrea, is a flurry of activity in the form of consent bond agreements coming out for other co-defendants. So really that means that we can now expect to see a flurry of activity at the jail. That's how this typically has worked out over the past couple of days. The latest that we've seen is a bond agreement for Misty Hampton. This just came out within the last 5 minutes. Her bail has been set at $10,000. But I've got to tell you, Andrea, about 45 minutes before that news came out, I was inside the courtroom and I saw attorneys for Misty Hampton walking with one of the top prosecutors for Fani Willis's office. They were walking from one wing of their office and led down another hallway and into a stairwell. So we know that she was or her attorneys rather, were very likely going into a meeting with the DA's team. And that matches the cadence that we've seen all along, that attorneys will come down here, they'll go behind closed doors with the DA's team, they'll hammer out the terms of the agreement for surrender, and then shortly thereafter, we'll see the consent bond agreement be made public. That's what we're expecting to see with Rudy Giuliani's legal team as well as they make their way to the Fulton County Courthouse, Andrea.
A lot of activity, and Blaine, you're following it all and so closely. Thank you. And Catherine Christian, this is a stunning fall from grace for Rudy Giuliani after years spent taking on the mob as a prosecutor in Manhattan, as the number 3 in justice overall. Later, of course, so-called America's mayor. I covered him when he was running for the Senate briefly in 2000. So what an extraordinary story of personal drama.
Extraordinary. And to be reminded, he's been suspended from the practice of law in New York for 2 years. And the Washington, D.C. bar has recommended that he be disbarred there. And they made a statement. They said, as part of their decision, that his misconduct transcends all of his past accomplishments. So yes, he was the Southern District U.S. Attorney. Yes, he was the mayor of New York City. But he is the laboring oar of this alleged conspiracy in Fulton County. And also, if you recall the special counsel's January 6th indictment, he is co-conspirator number 1, and he is all over that indictment because of the allegations that he went to Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and espoused false information to large segments of the public in order to discredit the rights of legal voters. So he is not being prosecuted for creative lawyering, bad lawyering, or for his First Amendment speech. He is being prosecuted because he allegedly was part of this conspiracy to overturn the election results in Georgia in favor of Donald Trump. It is no wonder why, if the reporting is correct, that he is seeking to have Mr. Trump pay for his legal fees, because he was the main guy who went through all of these states and committed all of these acts. He'll say they were legal acts. The prosecutors say they're illegal acts.
Phil Rucker, you've written 2 books already on Donald Trump, and Rudy Giuliani is part of that story, part of that narrative. They go back all the way to the highs and the lows in New York City for both people.
That's right, Andrea. Rudy Giuliani is a longtime friend, confidant, political advisor to Donald Trump even before he ran for office. But, you know, when Trump was a candidate for office and then during the 4 years of his presidency, Rudy Giuliani was a fixture at his side. He did not work in the administration, but was very close to Trump throughout, helping him navigate scandals, representing him as his personal attorney on a number of matters. And as we all recall, lying on his behalf to the public in media interviews and press statements, as well as, of course, when he was going state to state in the weeks following the 2020 election to try to press these really unfounded claims of voter fraud and providing no evidence to support them.
And we should also point out, Phil, you know, from the first impeachment, he was very involved in going to Ukraine and trying to find evidence of influence from, you know, the former vice president and his son and other people. I remember interviewing him in Warsaw when he was with 2 of the key players in that whole narrative.
A key figure in trying to pressure the Ukrainian government to dig up dirt on a political opponent of Trump, who was Joe Biden, of course, and his son Hunter.
Elena Parent, so talk to me about the greater Atlanta community and how they're reacting. You're an elected official representing in the state legislature?
Well, Georgians watched as Trump and Giuliani and his lackeys attempted to overturn the election, disenfranchise millions of Georgia voters, and frankly, attempt a coup. And, when you really think about it, the charges could not be more serious, because anyone that attempts to subvert an election in this manner is attacking the very foundation of our democracy, and therefore really of the entire United States. And, we have here in Atlanta right now, and in the state capitol, where I am currently, a real divide, as we see throughout American society. Some of us, like myself, believe that these charges are incredibly serious, and that Georgians do deserve to see the legal process play out and hold individuals accountable for what their alleged acts are. We have other colleagues of mine who are calling for a special session to try to, quote unquote, defund Fani Willis, the prosecutor, or have her disbarred, which is not something that the state legislature even has any power to do. So you really do see that split screen reaction, unfortunately. I wish we could all conclude how serious these alleged acts are.
And Catherine Christian, I just wanted to circle back to you on this point regarding the classified documents case, because how significant do you think that Chavilares has now recanted his testimony, now that he has a public defender and is not going with the Trump super PAC lawyer? How big an asset could that be to Tavares's testimony as a potential witness for Jack Smith?
Well, will be very compelling testimony. I believe he's employee number 4 in the superseding indictment. So when he was represented by people who were connected to Trump, he testified in the grand jury falsely. And then when he had a new attorney, he recanted and went truthfully. And so now he's clearly cooperating with the prosecution and will be one of the lead witnesses against Nauta and De Oliveira and Mr. Trump about the attempt to delete the server. So it's very important. He will testify to how, I don't know whether or not he was told to not testify truthfully, but if he was, he'll say that. And then how he decided it was important for him to now tell the truth. So he will be a very important witness against Mr. Trump and his 2 co-defendants.
And potentially signal to others, and especially in this large Georgia case, that you don't get indicted if you end up, cooperating properly and truthfully. Yes. Philip, we're going to talk a lot about the debate coming up, the polling and everything else, but you know Donald Trump better than any of us. Is there any chance that he's not going to be watching?
Oh, Andrea, of course he's going to be watching. He lives for these moments, and he's going to want to watch. And he's frankly, I think, going to be looking to see how much of a fixture he becomes in this debate, even though he's not on stage as a candidate. The Republican primary race really revolves around him at the moment. He's far and away the front-running candidate, and I expect a lot of the candidates on stage tonight are going to be having to talk about him and grapple with all the news about Trump, even though Trump's not on stage. And Trump almost certainly will be watching, or at least will watch some sort of recording of it later in the evening, probably.